My name is Blanche, and I am 54 years old. For 28 years, I waited to see my only daughter walk down the aisle in a wedding dress. I never imagined I would end up lying on the floor while 200 guests laughed at me. My son-in-law looked down and said words that made my blood boil. But what happened next changed everything. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from today. Hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes we fall so we can rise stronger than before. I met Thomas when I was just 17 years old. He was the boy next door, literally. His family moved into the small house beside ours in a quiet neighborhood in Tennessee, and from the moment I saw him carrying boxes from his father's truck, I knew there was something special about him. He had kind eyes and a smile that could light up a room. We started dating in our senior year of high school, and by the time I was 22, we were married in a small ceremony at the local church. Thomas worked as an electrician. He was not a man of many words, but he showed his love through actions. He would wake up before dawn to take on extra jobs, so we could save money for a house. I learned to sew from my grandmother, and I started taking in alterations and small tailoring jobs from neighbours. Our life was simple. We did not have fancy cars or expensive vacations, but we had each other, and that was more than enough. When I was 26, Sophie came into our lives. She was born on a rainy April morning, and the moment the nurse placed her in my arms, I felt a love so overwhelming that it brought tears to my eyes. Thomas stood beside me, his rough hands trembling as he touched her tiny fingers. He whispered that she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And she was. Sophie grew up to be a curious child with her father's gentle nature and my stubborn determination. She would sit beside me at my sewing machine, watching the needle move up and down, asking questions about every stitch. Thomas would take her to work sometimes on weekends, teaching her how to fix simple things around the house. We were not a wealthy family, but our home was filled with laughter and warmth. Then tragedy struck when Sophie was 7 years old. Thomas was working at a construction site downtown. There was an accident involving faulty wiring and a collapsing scaffold. By the time they called me, he was already gone. I remember standing in the hospital corridor, clutching Sophie's hand, unable to breathe. The world had stopped spinning, and I did not know how to start it again. The days after Thomas's funeral were the darkest of my life. I wanted to give up. I wanted to crawl into bed and never come out. But every morning, Sophie would come into my room with her small face full of worry, asking if I was okay. She needed me. She was only 7, and she had already lost her father. I could not let her lose her mother too, so I got up, I dried my tears, and went back to work. I took on every sewing job I could find. I altered wedding dresses for brides who had no idea that the woman hemming their gowns was drowning in grief. I stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, my fingers bleeding from needle pricks, just to make enough money to keep the lights on and food on the table. Sophie became my reason to keep going. I promised myself that I would give her every opportunity I never had. When she showed interest in academics, I worked extra hours to pay for tutoring. When she wanted to join the school's math team, I sold my mother's old jewellery to afford the competition fees. I never told her about the sacrifices. I did not want her to feel guilty for wanting things. Years passed, and Sophie blossomed into a brilliant young woman. She graduated from high school with honours and earned a scholarship to study accounting at the State University. I remember sitting in the audience at her graduation ceremony, tears streaming down my face, thinking about how proud Thomas would have been. All those sleepless nights, all those sacrifices had led to this moment. After college, Sophie got a job at one of the largest real estate companies in our region. She moved to the city, but called me every week. We would talk for hours about her work, her friends, her dreams. She was climbing the corporate ladder, and I could not have been more proud. Then 3 years ago, Sophie introduced me to Derek. She brought him home on a Sunday afternoon, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she led him through our front door. Derek was tall, well-dressed, and undeniably handsome. He had the kind of confidence that came from growing up with money. His father, Gerald, owned the real estate company where Sophie worked. Derek was being groomed to take over the business someday. I remember shaking his hand and noticing how smooth his palms were. He had never worked a day of hard labor in his life. That was not a judgment, just an observation. What bothered me was the way he looked around my house. His eyes scanned the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the old television set. There was something in his gaze that made me uncomfortable, though I could not quite name it. When Sophie went to the kitchen to get us some lemonade, Derek turned to me and asked what I did for a living. I told him I was a seamstress. I ran a small tailoring shop in town. His lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. He said that was interesting and that he did not know people still did that kind of work. The way he said it made me feel small, but Sophie seemed happy. Her face glowed when she looked at him, so I pushed my doubts aside. I told myself I was being overprotective. Derek came from a different world, and perhaps he simply did not know how to relate to someone like me. I convinced myself that once we got to know each other better, things would improve. I was wrong. A month after Sophie announced her engagement, I was invited to have dinner at Derek's family home. I remember standing outside their estate, my heart pounding with nervousness. The house was enormous. It sat on acres of manicured lawn with white columns and a circular driveway that looked like something out of a movie. My old car felt out of place parked next to their luxury vehicles. Gerald greeted me at the door with a firm handshake. He was a tall man in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. There was an intensity about him that commanded attention, but he was polite enough. He welcomed me into his home and led me to the dining room where Lorraine, his wife, was waiting. Lorraine was the kind of woman who looked like she had never broken a sweat in her life. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her dress designer. She smiled at me, but it was the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. She asked me about my work, and the way she phrased her questions made me feel like I was being interviewed for a job I was not qualified for. Derek sat across from me at the dinner table. Throughout the meal, he barely acknowledged my presence. Whenever I tried to contribute to the conversation, he would interrupt me or change the subject. At one point, I was telling a story about making wedding dresses for local brides, and Derek laughed. He said that in this day and age, nobody wanted handmade clothes anymore. Everyone wanted designer labels from New York or Paris. Sophie, sitting beside him, did not defend me. She just looked down at her plate. A week later, Lorraine announced that she would be handling all the wedding arrangements. She had already booked a 5-star hotel for the venue and hired a celebrity wedding planner from Atlanta. When I offered to contribute financially, she waved her hand dismissively. She said there was no need for that. Her tone suggested that whatever I could offer would be insignificant anyway. I asked Sophie if I could at least make her wedding dress. It was something I had promised her when she was a little girl. She used to sit on my lap watching me sew and say that one day she wanted her mama to make her the most beautiful dress in the world. I had been dreaming of that moment for decades, but before Sophie could answer, Derek stepped in. He said that Sophie would be wearing a custom gown from a designer in New York. He said it would be embarrassing for her to wear something handmade. I looked at Sophie, hoping she would object. She did not. She just gave me an apologetic look and said that maybe I could make something for the rehearsal dinner instead. I went home that night and sat beside my old sewing machine, the same one I had used to sew countless gowns for other people's daughters. I ran my fingers over the worn wood, thinking about all the dreams I had stitched into that machine. Then I cried until there were no tears left. In the 6 months leading up to the wedding, I was systematically excluded from every decision. I was not invited to choose the flowers. I was not asked for my opinion on the menu. I was not included in the cake tasting or the venue walkthrough. Every time I called Sophie, she was either busy or with Derek's family. Derek started answering Sophie's phone. He would tell me she was not available in a tone that made it clear I was not welcome to call again. Once I drove to their apartment unannounced because I had not heard from Sophie in 2 weeks. Derek opened the door and told me Sophie was out even though I could see her car parked in the lot. My sister Margaret, who lived in Nashville, started warning me. She said Derek was isolating Sophie from her own family. She had seen this pattern before in unhealthy relationships. She urged me to talk to Sophie about it, but I did not want to cause problems. I kept telling myself that wedding planning was stressful for everyone. Things would go back to normal after the ceremony. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received my invitation in the mail. It was an elegant envelope with gold lettering. I opened it carefully, my hands shaking with anticipation. But when I read the card, my heart sank. My name was printed in tiny letters at the bottom corner, listed under the groom's extended family. I was the mother of the bride, and I had been reduced to an afterthought. I put the invitation in my drawer and tried not to think about it. I told myself that the important thing was seeing Sophie happy. The seating arrangement did not matter. The exclusions did not matter. What mattered was being there for my daughter on the most important day of her life. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I just did not want to admit it. The morning of the wedding arrived and I woke up before the sun rose. I had barely slept the night before, my mind racing with a mixture of excitement and unease. I showered and spent extra time on my hair and makeup, wanting to look my best for Sophie. Then I put on the dress I had been working on for 3 months. It was a deep burgundy gown with delicate beadwork along the neckline. I had sewn every bead by hand, pouring my love into each stitch. Margaret picked me up at 9:00. She had driven down from Nashville the day before, and her presence was a comfort. As we drove toward the hotel where the wedding would take place, she kept glancing at me with concern. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, but my voice wavered. I carried something special in my purse that day. It was a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. She had worn it on her wedding day, and I had worn it on mine. I wanted to give it to Sophie before the ceremony, to continue the tradition. It was not expensive or flashy, but it carried the weight of generations of love. When we arrived at the hotel, I asked to see Sophie. A staff member led me to the bridal suite on the 3rd floor. But when I got there, Lorraine was standing outside the door like a guard. She told me that Sophie was getting her makeup done and could not be disturbed. I explained that I just wanted to give her something, that it would only take a minute. Lorraine shook her head. She said Sophie had given strict instructions not to be interrupted. I did not believe that. Sophie would never refuse to see me on her wedding day, but I did not want to cause a scene, so I stepped back. I told Lorraine to please let Sophie know I was here. Lorraine said she would pass along the message, then turned and went back inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Margaret found me standing in the hallway, clutching the pearl necklace in my hand. She asked what happened, and I told her. Her face darkened with anger, but I held her arm and told her to let it go. We would see Sophie at the ceremony. When we entered the reception hall to find our seats, I realized we had been assigned to table 12. It was near the back exit, as far from the main stage as possible. The people at our table were strangers to me. They were business associates of Gerald there, more for networking than for celebrating. I looked up at table 1, right in front of the stage. Gerald and Lorraine sat there with Derek's grandparents and a few important-looking guests. That was where the mother of the bride should have been seated. Instead, I was practically invisible. Before the ceremony began, I tried to make my way toward the front. I wanted to see Sophie one more time before she walked down the aisle, but a wedding coordinator stopped me and asked where I was going. When I told her I wanted to speak to the bride, she checked her clipboard and said my name was not on the approved list. I was escorted back to my seat like a trespasser at my own daughter's wedding. The ceremony started, and Sophie appeared at the entrance of the hall. She was breathtaking in her designer gown, her hair swept up elegantly, her face radiant. But it was Gerald who walked her down the aisle, not me. Nobody had even asked if I wanted to be part of that moment. I sat in my seat, tears rolling down my cheeks, watching a stranger give away my daughter. When Pastor Thomas asked who gives this woman to be married, Gerald stood up and answered. His voice echoed through the hall, and everyone smiled and nodded. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell them all that I was her mother, that I had raised her alone, that I had sacrificed everything for her, but I stayed silent. I did not want to ruin Sophie's day. The vows were exchanged, the rings were given, and Derek kissed his bride. The crowd erupted in applause. I clapped along with them, but my heart felt hollow. Sophie had not looked at me once during the entire ceremony, not a single glance in my direction. After the ceremony ended, the guests began moving into the grand ballroom for the reception. I tried to catch Sophie's eye as she walked past with Derek, but she was surrounded by people congratulating her. When she finally saw me approaching through the crowd, she turned and started talking to someone else. It was a deliberate avoidance, and it cut deeper than any words could have. Margaret grabbed my hand and squeezed it. She told me to stay strong. We would get through this together. I nodded, but I could barely breathe. Something was very wrong, and I could feel it building toward an explosion. I had no idea how right that feeling was. The ballroom was decorated magnificently. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft light over round tables draped in white linen. Flower arrangements, worth more than my monthly income, sat as centerpieces on every table. A string quartet played classical music in the corner, while waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of champagne. I stood near the entrance, scanning the room for an empty seat closer to the head table. I spotted one at a table near where Sophie and Derek would be sitting for dinner. It was not at table 1, but at least I would be able to see my daughter's face during the meal. I made my way toward the chair, weaving through clusters of guests who were chatting and laughing. When I reached the table, I noticed Derek approaching from the opposite direction. He was smiling, and for a moment I thought perhaps he wanted to make amends. Perhaps he realized how he had been treating me and wanted to start fresh. Derek reached the chair before I did. He pulled it out with an exaggerated flourish, gesturing for me to sit. He said something about wanting to help the mother of the bride get comfortable. A few nearby guests smiled at the gesture. I thanked him and began to lower myself into the seat. That is when he yanked the chair away. I fell backward, my arms flailing, and landed hard on the marble floor. The impact shot pain through my hip and lower back. My dress rode up and one of my heels flew off. I lay there on the cold ground, stunned, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The room went quiet for a second. Then I heard laughter. A few guests started chuckling, thinking it was some kind of prank. Derek stood over me, looking down with a smirk on his face. He spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. He said my place was on the floor. More people started laughing. Some covered their mouths, embarrassed but still amused. Others joined in, openly thinking it was part of some wedding entertainment. I lay there on the floor of the grand ballroom, humiliated in front of 200 people, while my daughter's new husband gloated over me. Margaret came running. She pushed through the crowd and knelt beside me, helping me sit up. She turned to Derek and called him a disgusting excuse for a man. Derek just shrugged and said it was only a joke and that I needed to lighten up. His friends gathered behind him, laughed, and slapped his back like he had done something clever. I looked around for Sophie. She was standing about 20 feet away, her face pale, her eyes wide. But she did not move. She did not rush to my side or defend me. She just stood there frozen while her husband humiliated her mother in front of everyone they knew. I struggled to my feet with Margaret's help. My hip throbbed with pain and the hem of my dress was torn where I had landed on it. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me. Some pitied me, some were still laughing. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. Then something unexpected happened. Gerald stood up from table 1. The laughter died immediately. When Gerald moved, people paid attention. He walked toward me with measured steps, his face unreadable. Derek's smirk faltered slightly as he watched his father approach. Gerald stopped in front of me. He looked at my torn dress, at the tears I was trying to hold back, at the dignity I was fighting to maintain. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He bowed his head slightly and apologized. He said he was deeply sorry for what his son had just done. He turned to face Derek, and his voice went cold. He told Derek that he had gone too far. He said this woman was the mother of the bride, that she deserved respect, that she had raised Sophie alone after losing her husband, that she had worked harder than Derek had ever worked in his entire privileged life. The room was silent. Derek's face turned red. He tried to say it was just a joke, but Gerald cut him off. He said it was not funny. It was cruel and shameful. Then Gerald turned back to me. He offered his arm and asked if I would allow him to escort me to table 1. He said I belonged there, not at some corner table near the exit. He said the mother of the bride should be seated in a place of honor. I was trembling, but I took his arm. He walked me through the silent ballroom to the head table and personally pulled out a chair for me. This time, he held it firmly until I was safely seated. Lorraine looked horrified, but she did not say a word. I had just been given a seat at the table of power, but the night was far from over. A young woman near the back of the room suddenly stood up. She was in her mid-20s, with long dark hair and nervous eyes. She walked toward the front of the ballroom, and I could see that her hands were shaking. Derek noticed her, and his face went white. He stepped toward her, trying to intercept her, but Gerald raised his hand and told him to stop. Gerald asked the woman to speak. She introduced herself as Nadia. Her voice was thin but determined. She said she had something to tell everyone, something she could not keep inside any longer. Then she dropped a bomb that shattered the evening completely. Nadia said she was pregnant with Derek's child. She said they had been in a relationship for 2 years, even while he was dating Sophie. She said she could not stand by and watch him marry another woman while carrying his baby. The gasps were audible. Sophie stumbled backward, like she had been physically struck. Derek tried to deny it, but another man stood up from one of the back tables. It was Carl, Derek's cousin. He said he had known about the affair for over a year. He said he could not stay quiet anymore because what Derek was doing was wrong. Sophie stood in the middle of the chaos, her beautiful wedding dress suddenly looking like a costume from a nightmare. She looked at Derek, then at Nadia, then at me. In her eyes, I saw something I had not seen in years. I saw the little girl who used to run to me when she was scared. I saw my daughter lost and betrayed, finally understanding what I had been trying to protect her from. Sophie reached up and unclasped the pearl earrings Lorraine had given her. She took off the diamond bracelet from Derek's grandmother. Then she pulled the wedding ring off her finger and placed everything on the table in front of Derek. She did not say a word. She just turned and walked out of the ballroom. I stood up from my seat at table 1 and followed her. I found Sophie sitting on the marble steps outside the hotel entrance. Her wedding dress was pooled around her like spilled milk, and her makeup was ruined from crying. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and her face crumpled. I sat down beside her without saying anything. I just put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. She buried her face in my neck and sobbed. She kept saying she was sorry over and over, her words broken by hiccups and tears. After a while, the crying slowed. Sophie pulled back and looked at me with red, swollen eyes. She asked if I hated her. I told her I could never hate her. I told her she was my daughter, my only child, the best thing that ever happened to me. Then Sophie started talking. It was like a dam had broken. She told me everything. She told me how Derek had slowly convinced her that I was not good enough. He would make comments about my house, my job, my clothes. He would say that I was holding her back, that I was an embarrassment, that successful people did not come from backgrounds like mine. He told her that if she wanted to fit into his world, she needed to distance herself from her past. At first, Sophie resisted. She defended me, defended our life together, but Derek was relentless. He was charming and manipulative. He twisted every conversation until Sophie started doubting herself. He isolated her from her friends, from her family, from me. By the time she realized what was happening, she felt trapped. Sophie said she knew the wedding was a mistake. She had known it for months, but she did not know how to get out. Derek controlled their finances. He had convinced her that without him, she would have nothing. She was scared. I listened to every word. I did not interrupt or judge. When she finished, I told her something I should have said a long time ago. I told her that no matter what happened, I would always be here. I told her that she was stronger than she knew. I told her that walking away from a mistake was not failure. It was courage. Sophie asked if I could ever forgive her. I told her there was nothing to forgive. She had been manipulated by someone who was supposed to love her. That was not her fault. We sat on those steps for a long time, mother and daughter holding each other in the cold night air. The sounds of confusion and commotion drifted out from the ballroom, but we did not go back inside. Eventually, Gerald came out to find us. He stood a few feet away, giving us space. He cleared his throat and apologized again for his son. He said he had suspected something was wrong with Derek for a long time, but had never had proof. He said he should have paid closer attention. Gerald offered to cover all the costs of cancelling the wedding and unwinding the legal arrangements. He said he would make sure Derek did not cause any more trouble. He asked if there was anything else he could do. I thanked him, but told him that Sophie and I would take care of ourselves. We had been doing it for a long time. We did not need his money. We just needed each other. Gerald nodded. He seemed to respect that answer. He wished us well and went back inside. Margaret pulled up in her car a few minutes later. She helped Sophie into the back seat, and I climbed in beside my daughter. As we drove away from the hotel, Sophie leaned her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes. The night skyline of the city slid past the windows. Street lights blurred into streaks of gold. I held my daughter's hand and thought about all the years I had spent dreaming of her wedding day. This was not how I had imagined it would end, but somehow it felt like a beginning. Sophie moved back home with me that same night. She changed out of her wedding dress and put on an old pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that had been in her childhood closet for years. We made hot chocolate and sat in the kitchen until sunrise talking about everything and nothing. The first few days were hard. Sophie barely left her room. She was processing the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss of the future she had planned. I gave her space, but made sure she knew I was always nearby. I cooked her favourite meals from childhood: chicken pot pie, macaroni and cheese from scratch, banana pancakes on Sunday morning. Derek called constantly. His number would flash on Sophie's phone at all hours. She did not answer. When he started leaving angry voicemails threatening to ruin her reputation, I took the phone from her hands and blocked his number myself. One afternoon, Derek showed up at our door. I heard his car pull into the driveway and saw him marching toward the house with fury on his face. I met him on the porch before he could knock. He demanded to see Sophie. He said she was being ridiculous. He said the whole thing with Nadia was a misunderstanding, that she had seduced him, that it was not his fault. He said Sophie belonged with him, that she needed him. I stood in the doorway, 5 feet 4 inches of a 54-year-old seamstress facing down a man half my age. I told him he needed to leave. I told him he had hurt my daughter enough. I told him that if he ever set foot on my property again, I would call the police. Derek laughed. He said I was pathetic. He said I was nothing, that I had always been nothing, that Sophie had been ashamed of me, and that was why she chose his family over me. I did not flinch. I looked him straight in the eyes and said that he was welcome to believe whatever he wanted. But my daughter was inside safe and he was out here alone. That was the only truth that mattered. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him. His smirk faded. He called me a word I will not repeat, then turned and walked back to his car. He peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching. I went back inside and found Sophie standing at the top of the stairs. She had heard everything. She came down and hugged me tighter than she had in years. Over the following weeks, Derek tried other tactics. He spread rumours about Sophie at the company where they both worked. He told people she was unstable, that she had sabotaged their wedding, that she was the one who had cheated. Colleagues who had been friendly started avoiding her. Her work environment became toxic. I told Sophie she did not have to stay at that job. Her skills and experience were valuable. She could find work somewhere that did not have Derek's shadow hanging over it. She was hesitant at first, afraid of starting over. But eventually she agreed. I reached out to Gerald, not to ask for help, but to ask him to make Derek stop the harassment. I was not going to beg, but I also was not going to let my daughter be tormented. Gerald listened and said he would handle it. 2 days later, the rumours stopped. Sophie told me that Derek had been called into his father's office for a long meeting, and after that, he left her alone. Sophie applied for jobs at other companies and got several interviews. Her resume was strong and her references were solid, despite everything Derek had tried. Within a month, she had accepted a position at a smaller firm that valued her work ethic and talent. She started coming back to life. She joined a support group for people who had been in controlling relationships. She learned to recognize the warning signs she had missed with Derek. She started smiling again, laughing again, dreaming again. One evening she came home from work and found me in the shop sewing a dress for a client. She sat down in the old chair beside my machine just like she used to when she was a little girl. She watched me work for a while without speaking. Then she said something that made me stop mid-stitch. She said she was sorry for ever being ashamed of me. She said that all those years I spent sewing, taking care of her, building a life for us, with my own 2 hands, that was something to be proud of. She said I was the strongest person she knew. I set down my fabric and looked at my daughter. Her eyes were clear, her voice steady. This was not guilt talking. This was genuine realization. I told her that I never needed her to be proud of me. I just needed her to know I would always be there. She nodded, and we did not need to say anything else. A year passed. The seasons changed 4 times, and with each one our lives grew fuller and richer. I took stock of everything that had happened. That night at the wedding, lying on the floor while strangers laughed, had been the lowest point of my life, but it had also been a turning point. Sometimes you have to hit the ground before you can find the strength to stand. I started attending a women's group at our church. We met every Wednesday evening to share stories and support each other. Some of the women had been through divorces, some had lost children or spouses, some were dealing with illnesses or job losses, but all of us were learning the same lesson. Survival is not about avoiding pain. It is about moving through it. I wrote letters to Thomas. I know that sounds strange, writing to a man who has been gone for over 20 years, but it helped me process my feelings. I would sit at the kitchen table after Sophie went to bed and write about everything that had happened. I told him about Derek, about the wedding, about how our daughter had come home. I told him I missed him every single day, and I told him I was okay. Forgiving Derek was not easy, but I did it anyway. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Carrying anger is like holding a hot coal. You are the one who gets burned. I let go of my resentment, and with it went a weight I had not realized I was carrying. I even forgave Sophie, though she insisted there was nothing to forgive. I understood that she had been manipulated. Young love can blind us to things that are obvious to everyone else. She made mistakes, but she also had the courage to walk away when the truth came out. That took strength. As for the other players in this story, life moved on for them too. Derek and Nadia did get married eventually, but from what Carl told us, it was not a happy union. Trust that is built on betrayal does not hold. Gerald slowly transferred leadership of the company to other executives, making it clear that Derek would not be inheriting the business. Lorraine sent me a card a few months later. It was short, just a few sentences of apology. I did not respond, but I appreciated the gesture. Sophie threw herself into her new job and excelled. She made new friends, real friends, who valued her for who she was. She started taking pottery classes on weekends and discovered she had a talent for it. Her apartment filled with lopsided bowls and uneven vases that she had made herself, and she displayed them with pride. She also started dating again, cautiously. There was a man at her office named Peter who had been kind to her from the start. He was nothing like Derek. He was quiet, thoughtful, and completely uninterested in impressing anyone. He came over for dinner one Sunday and spent the whole evening asking me about my sewing business. He actually listened to my answers. Margaret visited more often, and the three of us would spend weekends cooking elaborate meals and watching old movies. Sometimes Carl would join us, having distanced himself from Derek's side of the family. Our little house, once so quiet, was now full of laughter and conversation. I thought a lot about what it means to fall and what it means to rise. The floor of that ballroom had been cold and hard. The laughter had been cruel, but I got up. I found my footing, and in the end, I was still standing when the people who pushed me down had lost everything that mattered. A year after the wedding that never was, Sophie called me with news. She and Peter were engaged, but before I could say anything, she added something else. She asked me to make her wedding dress. I could not speak for a moment. I just held the phone to my ear and let the tears fall. When I found my voice, I said yes. Of course, yes. I had been waiting 28 years for this. The wedding was small. It took place in the backyard of my little house with white chairs arranged on the grass and wildflowers in mason jars. Margaret officiated because she had gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. About 30 people attended, all of them people who genuinely loved Sophie and Peter. I made Sophie's dress from scratch. It was not a designer gown from New York. It was ivory silk with hand-sewn lace along the bodice, simple and elegant. Sophie stood in front of my bedroom mirror on the morning of the wedding, and I helped her with the buttons in the back. She turned to look at herself, and her eyes filled with tears. She said it was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. She said she was proud to wear something her mother had made. I pinned my mother's pearl necklace around her neck, the one I had wanted to give her a year ago. This time, there was no one to stop me. When Sophie walked down the makeshift aisle, I was the one who walked beside her. I held her arm, and with each step, I felt the weight of the past lifting away. At the end of the aisle, I placed her hand in Peter's, and I told him to take care of my girl. He promised he would. The reception was nothing fancy. We had barbecue and coleslaw and a 3-layer cake that Margaret and I had baked together. People danced on the grass to music from a portable speaker. Sophie laughed so hard at one point that she spilled lemonade all over her dress, and she did not care one bit. As the sun set and the fairy lights came on, Sophie found me sitting on the porch swing. She sat down beside me, her dress rustling, and rested her head on my shoulder. She said, "Thank you." She said she loved me. She said she was sorry it took her so long to see what was right in front of her all along. I told her that some lessons take time. The important thing was that she learned them. We sat there together as the stars came out, mother and daughter, exactly where we belonged. If you are watching this, and you have ever been knocked down by someone who should have lifted you up, I want you to know something. The floor is not where you belong. You can lie there for a moment. You can catch your breath. But then you get up. You dust yourself off. And you keep going. Do not let anyone else define your worth. Not a spouse, not a child, not a stranger at a party. Your value is not measured by how others treat you. It is measured by how you treat yourself. I spent so many years thinking I was not enough, not rich enough, not polished enough, not good enough for my daughter's new life. But in the end, I was exactly what she needed. A mother who loved her unconditionally, a safe place to come home to. And that my friends is worth more than all the designer gowns and 5-star hotels in the world. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel small? How did you find the strength to rise again? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these videos and know they are not alone. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss more stories like this one. And share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they are worthy of respect and love. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. May you always have the courage to stand up no matter how many times life tries to knock you down. And may you never forget that your place is not on the floor. Your place is wherever you choose to rise. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.